Hello, and welcome to Digital Threat. I'm your host, Sarah Ralston. In today's episode, we will talk to Ken Westbrook, founder and CEO of the Stop Scams Alliance. I would like to thank our sponsor, Proxyware, for supporting today's episode and for being part of the solution to keep vulnerable populations safe online. Ken, you are the founder and CEO of the Stop Scams Alliance. You were in the CIA for 33 years and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. You've held multiple high level positions at Fortune 500 software companies and co invented a patented security technology. So, that is an amazing background. I'm sure I missed a million things that you've done. Welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be with you today, Sarah.
What I would love to start with, Ken, is can you tell us a little bit about how you transitioned from the space that you were in to now being very focused on scams and protecting Americans from those threats?
Sure. Well, as you alluded to, my background is national security, it's information management. I think one thing you might have left out in my career history is Georgetown University asked me to create a class for them in information management. And then what happened in the spring of 2023 is my mom was the victim of a scam that occurred because she got a pop-up on her computer that invited her to call Microsoft, and she started talking to this friendly guy who was there to help her, and one thing led to another. So that was my mom's experience, and we can certainly talk more about that if you want to, but it just made a light bulb come on for me when I started to look into this phenomenon. It wasn't only my mom, it's millions of moms a year being affected by scams. And then digging deeper, I learned that they're mostly the work of transnational organized crime gangs. And then I learned further that our government isn't really set up to respond to this threat. And that's when I became alarmed and formed Stop Scams Alliance, because I felt it's time to understand the nature of the threat that we're under as a society and to start mounting the proper defenses.
I have heard you talk about the epidemic of scams that is prevalent in our world today. What is the most recent data showing about this problem?
Well, everybody sees it every day. You see the text messages you get, you see the spam messages, the fake phone calls every day. But how to measure it? Probably the best measures we have right now are coming from the FTC and the FBI, which collect reports from victims, people who self-select. Now, very few people actually report, but when you look at the report people who do report, last year, there was a 33% increase in the dollar losses reported to the FBI. When you look at it over a 10-year period, there's been a 20-fold increase in losses reported to the FBI over this time. And when you look at the curve, it looks like a hockey stick. This problem was not that bad 10 years ago. Starting about 5 years ago, it really started to ramp up. And I think it's because transnational organized crime gangs have started to develop a business model that really makes a business out of scams. And that's what's caused this enormous growth. They've hijacked the internet and our telephone systems and are now using that to attack us at scale.
You mentioned some of the FBI data and the IC3 report came out earlier this year on 2020. So I'm going to highlight a couple of key trends for the audience here. Investment scams are the most costly threat. Reported losses nearly doubled compared to 2022 and rose almost 50% year over year from 2023 to 2024. Malware related crimes have declined for 3 straight years, which seems positive on the surface. In 2024, holders only reported 45 incidents of malware to the IC3, and that is across the entire US for anybody aged 60 or older. Conversely, what we have detected at Proxyware is 36,722 malware attacks just in 8 senior communities in Virginia.
Uh-huh.
So, to your point, not everyone reports, and there's not a centralized reporting mechanism. That stat right there really shows the disparity between what we're reporting as crime and what's actually happening in reality if you have better ways to get to that data.
Yeah, the other phenomenon there is people may not know they were the victims of malware. In my mom's case, I don't know what she would have said about how she was attacked. I believe, looking back at it, it was actually a malicious ad that placed malware on her computer that caused the pop up, but mom wouldn't have known that. All she knows is that her computer's taken over one day and a voice is telling her, do not turn off your computer. If you turn off your computer, it will lead to data loss, and call 1-800 Microsoft. So that was, she doesn't know the origin of it, I don't think. All she knows is what she sees on her screen.
We have
Go-
multiple anecdotes from assisted living communities where the kids of people who are 65 and above are having to shut down their bank accounts because it's getting so bad. And the people inside of the assisted facility, so the executives are asking for the children of these people to shut down their bank accounts because they have no way of stopping this otherwise.
Right. Yeah, it's really getting bad. I tell you, if you fast forward 5 years with the increasing use of AI by criminals, I'm really afraid that it's going to be a dystopian situation where people will have no way of knowing whether they're talking to their bank or not. And that's going to be a problem for our society and for our financial sector.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. The emergence of AI, especially in the bad actor arena, it has removed the technological barrier for entry for
Mhm.
bad actors to be bad actors. Anybody can go on ChatGPT, type, create a phishing kit for me. Now, you do have to be a little bit smart about it because there are some filters, but you can get around AI filters. And so there is ways for code to be created that can then be deployed with step-by-step instructions. Anybody can be a bad actor now.
Let me tell you a story.
Yeah,
ChatGPT was released some years ago. Within a year of ChatGPT being released, Fraud GPT was released. This is a
right.
pay for service. So criminals, you don't have to use ChatGPT and get around the filters. You can use Fraud GPT, pay a subscription of, I think it's about $1,000 a year, and it's tailor made AI as a service for criminal purposes.
That does not surprise me at all. And with that, at the same time, you have a generation that's aging that didn't grow up with technology. So to your point about your mom not knowing, was this malware? Was this something on a website? Most elders are not going to have that answer. And so I think that that is what's leading to this reduction in the reported malware cases because the technology is too advanced for someone to know that their machine is even infected by malware, let alone where it came from, what it's doing. But then something happens like a tech scam or like their credit card gets stolen, and then it gets reported in that way, even though the origin may be malware behind it.
Well, Sarah, you touched on this before, but you could be on a perfectly safe website. And it's a great, the ad itself is malicious, which makes it extremely difficult then for nursing homes, schools, colleges. What's their block list like? If these are ads appearing on seemingly harmless sites, there's no real way to have a block list that's going to be comprehensive and safe.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Cybersecurity is designed to protect devices, systems, and machines, not people. And people are much more complicated. I take my phone with me, which connects to the grocery store, my kids' school, my gym. That is also connected to my Mac, which shares a lot of the same information. And so if you're focused on one network, you miss protection on all of the others. If you're focused on one device, this interconnectivity between devices now becomes a problem. And so people are much more complicated, and bad actors study the psychology of marketing to know how to attack you, to get you to engage with content, but it's impossible to block because cybersecurity is very focused on, is this website good or bad? And for trusted websites serving harmful content, it's impossible to block. So then you leave the problem on education. How do you educate seniors about what is an ad block on a page? What is JavaScript? Those become very difficult conversations to have. So seniors are, in essence, losing autonomy because we don't know how to close this gap.
Ken, let me ask you, what did you do with your mom after the attack? What were the steps you took?
Well, the first is the emotional and financial impact. She was, of course, devastated emotionally, and we had to help her with reporting to the bank. The banks initially were optimistic because we reported it so soon that we might be able to get some of the money back, but it turned out not to be true. Criminals are very good about offshoring their ill-gotten gains very quickly now, so the money was gone. We helped then. It took some months to report the crime to various websites. As you may know, there's not a central place in the US to report these kinds of things. So victims' families end up reporting to local police, to Adult Protective Services, to the FTC, to the FBI. I can go on. We ended up reporting to over a dozen organizations. Let me tell you this one more story. So we heard nothing for a year's time, and then about a year after putting these, we submitted to FBI IC3. About a year after we did that, some FBI agents knocked on mom's door and asked her to retell the story because they were pursuing a case. So that was good news. But I think the stress from all this, that evening, she suffered the first of several heart attacks that ended up taking her life. So this is a very stressful crime for people, and especially having to report it and to then relive it over and over again. And then I don't know that anything ever did come out.
Yeah, the psychological impact is so damaging. And this type of crime is one, romance scams is another, where the psychological impact is just so bad for people. I've heard of cases where people have been in romantic relationships for as long as 10 years, losing millions of dollars to an individual only to find out that that person was not who they thought they were. And that I think is getting more attention. There's a Netflix show I think about it that recently came out. So that's getting attention, but there's so many other ways that people are being scammed that don't have as much focus and also have the same or worse in some cases psychological impact.
Yeah, the largest dollar losses by far are for investment scams, and that has the characteristic of you begin to trust somebody, they lead you into what turns into a fake cryptocurrency website. And so then when the plug is pulled and all your money is gone, you're left with the realization that this person you trusted has been swindling you the whole time. In the tech support scam, which is the pop-up that takes over your computer, you develop trust that you're dealing with Microsoft, and then they'll later on they'll put you in touch with what you think is your bank's fraud department. These are all trustworthy people, you believe. Then when all your dollars are stolen, you find out that you've been dealing with criminals the whole time. So this does have an effect on people. In addition to losing the dollars, there's the severe emotional impact of the betrayal that people feel.
I'm so sorry to hear about your mother. That's extremely difficult. The confidence lost is almost irreparable. My mother is 70 years old and we've gone through a few similar attacks to a much smaller degree. I was in the house thankfully when I heard her freak out because the computer started saying, "Do not close this tab, call this number immediately." And I was upstairs just visiting and I ran downstairs and she's on the phone with someone overseas and like put down the phone immediately.
Right.
And the impact after that was now she honestly questions herself and she thinks she's dumb. And it's really difficult to watch. And it's not true, but this is a different world now than it was. With AI, things are changing so fast every single day. I'm sure you have seen it firsthand the last 33 years, every single year. We're making more advances than we were able to make 20 years or 100 years before. So it's just
Right.
moving at light speed.
Well, so one thing that we're going to have to do, I think, that the use of AI for offensive purposes to attack us is going to keep increasing by leaps and bounds. Now, we can use artificial intelligence to defend ourselves too. And there are signs of that already popping up in the technology industry. For example, Microsoft on the Edge browser and Google in the Chrome browser now use AI to detect the characteristic look of that pop-up ad that appears on people's computers and then removes it into a thumbnail so that it restores the use of your browser and you can close out of it. So that's a really great technique. Now, that's only in Chrome and Edge, and it's only a pilot, and it's not on by default either. Okay, so people have to know about it, the capability, and to turn it on. But it's at least the beginnings of signs that we're able to start fighting back with using our own AI to defend ourselves. Another example of that is Android phones, which are made by Google provides the operating system. Starting in May of this year, the Google will use AI to, let's quote unquote, listen to the voice call on your phone. Now it's all on your phone and it never goes to Google. They don't actually hear it. But what's going on is they're using AI on your device to listen, and if you are engaging in a conversation that has the characteristics of a scam, Google will warn you about it. So that's a really cool technique too. Scams have a characters, they're not unlimited. They have certain characteristics because the people perpetrating these have scripts that they go by. And if you can train an AI engine to detect those what the scammers are saying in their conversations, and then use that to warn people, to detect it and warn people. So I'm very encouraged by those signs of the beginnings of technology companies here in the US to start to fight back against the scammers.
Yeah, similarly, I just got the Apple iPhone 17,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a new feature in the iOS that can limit scam calls.
Mm-hmm.
So when I get a call that it doesn't recognize the number, it will automated send a message that says, "What do you
Who are you?
want?" Basically, yeah. Who are you
Who are
and what
you?
do you want? And I can read that on my screen, both what the AI is sending and then what the person is saying is transcribed. And so I can read that on my phone and decide, do I want to pick the phone up or not? And so that's another great example of where technology is moving forward to try and reduce scam calls from happening. And Apple also will filter unknown senders into their own inbox as well. And so I think that separation is also very helpful to reduce the chances of people falling victim to scams. But scams take many forms. So my own story of my parents, they're in their 70s as well, and they got a call one day from a hospital in Las Vegas, and they were told that my son was in the hospital
Mm-hmm.
and that they needed to pay his hospital bill.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, they're very scared. Fear is a tactic that is used across across every type of scam, because when your brain is in a place of fear, your logical thinking goes out the window. So they were very afraid, but thankfully, because of my career, they didn't do anything. They called me. They hung up the phone and they called me first. And had they not, they would have been out $5,000. Many people out there have no idea. And when that fear kicks in, they don't know if it's true or not. And same thing with taking a photo of someone off of a social media account, turning that into a kidnapping video or things like that. And it's almost to the point in society where you have to sit down with your family and create words or phrases that they can say that would tell you they're actually in trouble. So almost like these code words, and Navy SEALs use them. You know, they go out with, these are my questions, these are my answers for identification purposes. That's almost the level at which we have to now operate as a society. And it's really scary to think that everyday people have to come up with these words and phrases to be able to manage the scam threat that exists.
Okay. Well, one of the things that Stop Scams Alliance advocates for is more authentication in our communications systems so that you have a better idea, at least, of who's on the other end of a phone call. So let me just give you some examples of how that could be. In the US, we're used to getting phone calls and text messages and not knowing who they're really from. But in other countries, they're putting authentication in. So, for example, there's now 22 countries around the world. If a foreign phone call comes into their country and is pretending to be a domestic call, the calls are blocked. In other countries, there's additional countries that allow the call to go through, but it's clearly labeled as a foreign phone call. But we don't have those clues in the US. So in the case of the call to your parents, in all likelihood, that was a foreign call coming in, but it was pretending to be a domestic call in order to win the confidence of your parents. So those kinds of calls could be blocked. The good news on that front, after 2 years of advocating for this yesterday, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, put out a notice. It's got this complicated acronym, NPRM, Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, that would propose for the first time for U.S. telephone carriers to start marking foreign phone calls as foreign, or just maybe even to block them in certain circumstances. So the US FCC now has started the process of figuring out, can we start blocking or at least allowing you to know when you're getting a foreign phone call? That's great. On another level, when you get a text message, all you get is a phone number and you don't know who that's really from. Well, there's now 5 countries in the world that, in addition to a phone number, they allow alphanumeric characters to be displayed. And then they lock down those alphanumeric characters. So only Amazon gets to say this message is from Amazon. Only Bank of America gets to use the words Bank of America in a text message. So this now allows you to know whether it's really from Amazon or really from Bank of America, whereas we don't have that capability in the US. We could build it. It's just a technological capability that we could build. We just have chosen not to do so yet.
Yeah. What do you think the push and pull is between tech companies that would have to build that kind of technology and regulation that protects people from these types of scams? What has been your experience with that?
The first one point is that when it comes to defending our telephone infrastructure or text messaging infrastructure or banks or anything, the first point to understand is that we have many more companies in the US than exist in, let's say, the UK or Australia. Here we have thousands of banks. There they have a few dozen. We have many more telephone carriers here than other countries that sometimes have a national carrier. It's more complicated here, and we have a more distributed threat vector. Let's call it that. But the second thing is that when it comes to these, we face a situation in our country where we have to start raising defenses, and defenses cost money. And what we haven't figured out is, well, who's going to pay that bill? Is the government going to pay the bill? Are the companies going to pay the bill? Or do we have consumers pay the bill? And all three can work. And we've used all different techniques in the past. We just haven't decided on how we're going to pay the bill. So that causes now companies to sit back and say, well, I'm not going to pay the bill myself. Somebody else maybe should pay the bill. So it's just caused us to sit back on our heels while the criminals are starting to have a field day.
That's been my experience too. There's a lot of not it that happens. I end up talking in state governments about how do we protect children while they're at school. Children in the last 10 months have been targeted with over 11 million attacks that we just incidentally detected while sitting in schools on school ISPs. So what we're doing in schools is not effective. It's not protecting kids. There's an epidemic of things like sextortion leading to a rise in suicides, anxiety, depression. But when we talk to state governments, it's, well, that's not my area, or I don't have funding for that. And
Mhm.
so it becomes a very local problem of go talk to this school individually. There are cybersecurity grants that are available, but schools would have to apply for them, get access to them, and then use them accordingly. So there's so many barriers and red tape, and so many people that want to help are aligned with this being the right thing to do. And yet, exactly what you said, who funds the bill is always the question.
At a very high level, we have a consensus in the US that when it comes to cyber threats against the government, we need to have somebody in charge. It's the National Cyber Director who sits in the White House. When it comes to protection of companies, the government gets involved. Again, this is the providence of the National Cyber Director is helping companies stay safe from cyber attacks. When it comes to protecting citizens, kids in schools, grandmas in nursing homes, the government doesn't perceive its job to do that yet. Now, I think the day will come, and we're working on doing that. But right now, as it stands, if you ask who's in charge of fraud policy to protect consumers in the US, the answer is nobody. The GAO did a report and found out that there's 13 different agencies that have some sliver of the fraud problem, but nobody is in charge at the moment.
I think the hardest part about that is that parents and adult children assume that their family is safe when they go to state institutions. And that's just not true, but that's your inherent thought. And that's a safety measure we all assume our local and state government has taken. So it's like when you send your kids to school, you expect that their laptops that you pay for or that taxpayers are funding are safer than they are. When you send your parents into an assisted living facility, you assume they're going to be safe from scams at this point. The general population is so unaware and just assumes that it is being taken care of.
And I will add the big tech perspective into that. So, working at Microsoft for 10 years, I always heard the question, well, why can't you just stop it? And that question inherently doesn't understand the scope of the problem. The internet has become so hyper targeted that sitting in Microsoft headquarters in Seattle, it would be impossible for me to see the types of scams that are targeting seniors in Florida or seniors in Arizona or children in India. Everything is very localized and hyper targeted to interest, and cloaking is so advanced now that it's very difficult to detect. So you need to have that localized kind of intervention at the state level or at the community level. And that's just not happening.
Sarah, at one point, I'd like to talk to you. I think that there are some technical measures that Microsoft and Apple could take to improve the defenses in the operating system level. And maybe it's not a subject for this podcast, but I think that there.
I definitely think there are things that can be done, and they require investment. And so it does go back to the who funds the problem. Even at Microsoft, there was technology that we could have potentially used that gets to that hyper targeting, defeats cloaking. But cloaking is just one of those things that is hard to see unless you're the victim. And then once you're the victim, you can kind of reverse engineer and see where's the cloaking happening and learn from that and use it in the future. But until you get that targeting to yourself, it's very difficult to detect.
I agree that that cloaking is an issue, and that's difficult to see. Although I think you know some techniques to go find it and provide better threat intel. But what I'm talking about is the tech support scam, which you know about, affected my mom. By volume, it's the number one scam that's reported to the FBI for the senior population. That has the characteristic of the installation of what's called remote access software that allows criminals to get access to your computer and see everything on it. And there are technical ways that that could be blocked that companies do as a matter of course. If you are a medium-sized company and you take a computer out of a box, a Microsoft computer, and hand it to the employee, you never just give it straight to them. Instead, you configure the operating system in a way that the people in the company is more highly protected. So what we're talking about at Stop Scams Alliance is the ability for that medium-sized business protection level to be built into the OS so that people could have the same advantages that companies can have when it comes to protection from remote access software installation, for example.
I think that's great for very specific types of scams that downloads or installs onto a computer. That should be a base level of security. In fact, a lot of tech scams that ask you to download something require you to interact with it to download it because they know that browser operating system antivirus measures are more stringent on auto downloads than it is on something that is user initiated. So they will give you the step-by-step instructions on how to download it so that it bypasses that level of network security or device security. So having something at the operating system level that works regardless of whether you initiated it or the computer auto downloaded it should be a default across devices.
Yes. Yeah, and just one more example of that. Remember I told you before that Android, just starting in May, started to warn people if it detects a voice call that seems scammy. The other thing that it does, by the way, is if it detects that the person is involving in what looks like a scam, it'll prevent side loading of apps during that period too. So that's another way. So in other words, they're using AI to temporarily block side loading of apps that can be injurious.
Speaking of apps, there's a lot to dive into this in that space. We don't have time today, but in the apps permission area, there's a lot that people don't know about what you're allowing apps to access on your device and then what you're allowing those apps to do on your behalf. So your access to your contacts, to your email, to your hard drives, to your listen to your phone calls, read your text messages. I've seen all of these actually written in app permissions. And yet we blindly just accept and download privacy policies without looking at what we're allowing those things to do on our devices.
Correct. Yeah. Location, etc. So what do you think about the use of ad blocking technology, Sarah? So let me just tell you this. The FBI recommends the use of ad blockers for people. The Secret Service recommends the use of ad blockers. The FTC recommends the use of ad blockers. DHS recommends the use of ad blockers. But when I talk to people, nobody ever knows that the government recommends that.
Yeah, most of the scams and attacks that are happening today are actually coming through advertising. So the use of ad blockers, if it was universal or applied across a wide number of people, would reduce the number of victims that are being created. However, big tech is very much going to push against that kind of widespread application because that's how they're monetizing the internet. You are the thing that's for sale. Your eyes on content, your clicks are the thing that's for sale. And so while there are no other mechanisms currently to actually reduce this epidemic level threat, ad blockers will make a difference. And if big tech still wants to monetize through ad content, then we need to figure out a way to actually make a difference in reducing harms and threats that come in through that channel.
Well, so you speak to state governments, and I am too. Perhaps I could recommend to state governments that for networks they run, if they're running a network that includes senior citizens facilities, that ad blocking should be on by default.
Not only that, let's think about kids. Again, 11 million attacks that we've detected on kids in ads in schools, where the ISP is a school district. So many people think that COPA means that kids can't see ads, but that's not at all what it means. It means that you can't say under 18 in your targeting parameters, but you can use interest-based ad targeting. So you can say, show this ad to someone who watched SpongeBob this morning and bought Play-Doh yesterday. And because it's interest-based, not age-based. And why are we showing ads to kids in schools?
Correct. Yeah.
Ken, I think we're out of time here. Thank you so much for joining the podcast today. It's been wonderful to talk to you as always. And I look forward to pushing state governments together to start to adopt these technologies that will turn the tide in the epidemic of scams.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, I so much enjoy talking to you and your partnership and the partnership of Proxyware. I know you guys are in the fight big time, and it's time that all of us have to elevate our game. And I appreciate your role in this.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ken.